The newspaper still lay crushed in his hand, ink bleeding in the rain. Duke's marriage exposed, contract bride bought for status. They had called her names: liar, gold digger, fraud. And he, the man she'd trusted most, said nothing to defend her. Her voice echoed through his mind, raw and breaking. "You told me once that everything you touch breaks." A pause. A heartbeat. "I didn't believe you. I do now." The car door closed. The rain swallowed her silhouette. And for the first time in his life, the Duke of Halston realized he hadn't lost a title. He'd lost the only person who ever saw the man beneath it. The museum always smelled of varnish and quiet heartbreak. Estella wiped the dust from the glass of an antique frame, her reflection blurring beside the portrait of a duchess who'd lived and died surrounded by gold. The irony wasn't lost on her. Every night, she curated beauty she could never afford, dreams that didn't belong to people like her. Outside, rain pressed against the windows in thin, shimmering lines. The city's elite would be gathering soon, the kind of people whose names appeared in glossy magazines, not utility bills. She tightened her bun, smoothed the faint paint stain on her blouse, and reached for the lights. Closing time. Then came the knock. It wasn't timid. It was sharp, deliberate. The kind of knock made by someone who'd never been denied entry to anything. Estella turned, frowning. "We're closed." The door opened anyway. A tall man stepped inside, trench coat darkened by the rain. Even soaked, he carried himself like the world owed him silence. His hair was black as spilled ink, his eyes a grey that didn't belong to mortals. The air shifted with him, as if the museum itself recognized the weight of his presence. "Miss Estella Vega?" His voice was low, deliberate. She noticed the faint accent, old money and older manners. She nodded, clutching her keys. "Who's asking?" He removed a leather glove and extended an envelope embossed with a silver crest, the kind she'd only ever seen on gossip pages. "Ryder Halston, the Duke of Halston Hall." Her heart stuttered. The name was legend and warning. The reclusive billionaire who rebuilt fallen empires and destroyed reputations with the same ease. Men feared him. Women fantasized about him. She only felt confusion. "I think you have the wrong person." "I don't." His gaze flicked over her, the frayed edges of her coat, the tired curve of her posture. It wasn't cruel, it was assessing, calculating. "You restored the Eversley collection, single-handedly. Your reputation for discretion is notable." She hesitated. "That was years ago, and I'm not for hire." "I'm not offering a job." He stepped closer. The click of his boots echoed against marble. "I'm offering an invitation." The envelope felt heavy in her hand, the seal unbroken but humming with promise. "To what?" "The Winter Gala, Halston Hall." His tone softened, barely. "Tomorrow evening." She laughed under her breath. "You must be joking. I have no reason to attend a nobleman's gala." "Now you do." He slipped his glove back on and turned toward the door. "A car will collect you at 7. Before she could protest, he was gone, leaving the faint scent of rain and cedar behind. By the next evening, Estella was still convincing herself not to go. It was absurd. She had nothing to wear, no idea why a man like Ryder Halston would summon her. But curiosity was its own kind of danger, and she'd spent her whole life playing safe. Maybe it was time she stopped. When the black car pulled up outside her narrow apartment, she hesitated only a second before stepping inside. Estella had tied her hair back and slipped into the same coat she'd worn the night before. No makeup, no perfume. Just herself, plain, steady, and armed with caution. The driver offered a polite nod, but no explanation. City lights blurred past, gold, silver, rain-slicked. By the time the gates of Halston Hall appeared, her pulse had taken on a rhythm all its own. Would you accept a deal that could change your life, even if it meant losing your heart? Comment below. Halston Tower didn't look like a home. It was a monument, a fortress of glass and iron that loomed over the Thames like a sentinel. The receptionist barely blinked when Estella gave her name. It was clear they'd been expecting her. "Take the elevator to the top floor," the woman said. "He's waiting." The lift doors closed with a hiss, sealing Estella in mirrored silence. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, a nervous mouth, a woman who had built her life on quiet resilience. She thought of her father then, his hands rough with paint, his voice steady even when debts swallowed their peace. "Never sell your dignity, mihia," he used to say, even when the world offers you everything else. The elevator opened to a room bathed in soft light and wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed London sprawled beneath a grey morning sky. And in the centre of it all stood Ryder Halston. He was not the tuxedoed vision of the gala. Today he wore a dark shirt rolled to the elbows, collar undone, a faint stubble shadowing his jaw. A man carved from control, yet there was something tired about the way he held himself, as if every breath came with weight. "Miss Vega," he said without turning, "you came." "I thought about not coming," she replied. "Then I realized you don't seem like someone who takes no for an answer." A ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth. "You're right. I don't." She stepped forward cautiously. "So what exactly is this? A publicity stunt?" Ryder motioned to the table where a folder waited, its pages neatly aligned beside a steaming pot of tea. "A contract," he said simply. Estella hesitated, then took the seat across from him. "You want me to pretend to be your Duchess for a year. Why? What do you get out of it?" He poured tea with unnerving precision, his movements deliberate. "My board is threatening to dissolve Halston Holdings. There's talk of corruption, scandal, lies planted by people who want my seat. The only way to silence them is to appear stable." "Stable?" "Married," he clarified. "Grounded. Human." Estella almost laughed. "And you think I can make you human?" His eyes met hers, grey and unflinching. "I think you can make me believable." She stared down at the folder, fingers tracing the embossed crest. "What makes you think I'd agree to this?" "I've read your file," Ryder said quietly. "You've been fighting to keep the Eversley Collection Museum open. Your funding runs out in 6 months. One headline: "The Duke's Duchess revitalizes Art Foundation, and every sponsor will come crawling." She felt her stomach twist. "So this is manipulation then?" "It's opportunity," he corrected. "For both of us." Estella opened the folder. The contract inside was written in crisp legal English, every clause numbered and polished. Her eyes skimmed the terms: public appearances, media coordination, wardrobe allowance, confidentiality agreements, and then one line froze her. Clause 17. No romantic involvement between parties. Her brows knit. No romantic involvement? He leaned back, voice calm but edged. "It's a protection clause." She looked up at him. "For whom?" "For both of us," he said after a pause. "I don't mix business with distractions." Her lips curved faintly. "Distractions. That's what you call people?" "That's what they usually become." His tone was dry, but his gaze flickered with something unreadable, an emotion caught between warning and regret. Estella shut the folder gently. "You must think very little of women." "I think too much of consequences." For a long moment, they simply watched each other. The rain had started again, streaking the glass with silver. Somewhere below, traffic moved like veins through the city. Estella wondered if he could feel how empty this beautiful place was, how lonely power could be. "You know," she said softly. "You talk about this like it's all business, but there's something else here, something you're not saying." Ryder's jaw tightened. "If I wanted therapy, I'd pay for it." "And yet," she said, "you called me instead." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was alive, sparking with the kind of tension that made words dangerous. Finally, he stood, crossing to the window. "I don't expect you to understand, but this is my offer. Sign it, and your museum's future is secure. Refuse, and I'll find someone else." "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple." "No," she said, rising to meet his gaze. "It's sad." He flinched, barely, but she caught it. For the first time, she saw something raw behind the marble facade. Grief, maybe guilt, maybe both. "You're wrong," he murmured. "It's necessary." Necessary to pretend to love someone for the world's approval? His eyes darkened. No. Necessary to keep the wolves from eating everything I've built. Estella studied him. The faint tremor in his hands, the restless way his fingers brushed his cufflinks. He wasn't lying. Whatever haunted him was real. She exhaled, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Effective," he corrected again, but his voice had lost its bite. She gathered her bag. "I'll think about it. You have until midnight." At the elevator door, she turned. "Tell me one thing, Your Grace. Why me?" His expression softened, just slightly. "Because you look like someone who wouldn't sell her soul, and I need someone who still remembers what one looks like." The doors slid shut between them, and Estella leaned against the mirrored wall, her heart drumming against her ribs. "Back home?" She stared at the contract on her table. Around her, the apartment seemed smaller, the silence louder. Her phone buzzed. Her lawyer friend, her landlord, a message from the museum board reminding her of next month's payment deadline. It felt like the universe was cornering her, pushing her towards something she didn't yet understand. She picked up the contract again, reread the clause that bound her more than all the rest. No romantic involvement. It wasn't just a condition. It was a warning. And yet, for reasons she couldn't explain, Estella couldn't stop thinking about the way his voice had cracked when he said the word wolves. There was a story buried beneath that calm, ruthless mask, a wound he refused to let anyone see. She wondered what kind of man built an empire out of grief, and what kind of woman would agree to stand beside him, even if it meant standing in the shadows. The clock ticked closer to midnight. The city pulsed below her window. And when the hour struck 12, Estella Vega, art curator, dreamer, survivor, picked up her pen. Some decisions are made not with logic, but with a heartbeat that refuses to listen. She signed her name. He called it a protection clause. She called it a warning. The ink on Estella's signature gleamed under the lamplight, drying like the quiet surrender it was. She sat in Ryder Holston's office, or rather his fortress of glass and silence, and wondered if she'd just traded her peace for someone else's power. When she looked up, he was watching her, not with triumph, but with that same distant gravity that had followed him since the night of the gala. "It's done," she said softly. "It's begun," he corrected. Those words would haunt her later. 2 days after the contract was sealed, the first test came, the winter gala at Halston Hall, the event that would introduce the Duchess to the world. Estella had never seen so many diamonds in one place. The ballroom shimmered with gold and arrogance, the chandeliers alive with light. Every guest there carried the same smile, wide, polished, and laced with curiosity. Ryder met her at the foot of the grand staircase, all black suit and command. "You're late." "I had to learn how to breathe in this dress," she murmured. The gown, navy silk with a low back and jeweled sleeves, wasn't her. It was the Duchess's. He offered his arm, expression unreadable. "Then breathe slower. The crowd feeds on nerves." She looped her hand through his. "What do they feed on when you're around?" "Fear," he said simply. They entered the ballroom to a hush. Heads turned, whispers bloomed like perfume. "Is that her? The new Duchess? She's ordinary." "No. Look at the way he's looking at her." Except he wasn't. Ryder was all poise and precision, the perfect duke sculpted for cameras. But beneath that stillness, Estella could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. "Smile," he whispered between clenched teeth. "I am." "Try one that doesn't look like a threat." She bit back a laugh. "I thought that was your specialty." Ryder's jaw twitched, the closest thing to amusement she'd ever seen from him. But when a young socialite approached, champagne in hand, his expression froze again. "Your Grace," the woman purred, eyes darting to Estella. "And this must be—" "My wife," Ryder said before she could finish, the words slicing through the air with deliberate force. The woman's smile faltered. "Ah, of course." She blinked, still recovering, then added with a hint of disbelief, "Funny, no one seems to recall getting an invitation to the wedding." Ryder's gaze was cool, unbothered. "That's because there wasn't one," he said smoothly. "It happened months ago. I preferred it quiet." The woman hesitated, caught between curiosity and etiquette. "I see," she murmured, forcing a brittle laugh before slipping away into the crowd. Estella managed a graceful nod, though her stomach knotted. The word wife felt like silk and chainmail all at once. Ryder's hand brushed her lower back as they moved on, a touch so light it could have been accidental, except nothing he did was ever accidental. "Does it bother you?" he asked under his breath. "The performance?" She lifted her chin. "Not yet. Ask me again in an hour." By the third dance, Estella's cheeks ached from smiling. The Duchess mask fit almost perfectly, poised, gracious, unbothered. But when Ryder's business rival approached, the illusion cracked. "Ryder," said Lord Winslow, his tone dripping with false civility, "I see you found yourself another Duchess. Let's hope this one lasts longer than the last." The crowd went still. Ryder's grip on Estella's waist tightened, but before he could speak, she turned to Winslow with a calm she didn't feel. "Oh, I planned to," she said, her voice velvet over steel. "Though, if I recall correctly, your last investment didn't last long either." A ripple of laughter spread through the circle. Winslow's smirk vanished. Ryder looked down at her, surprised, the faintest curve of admiration in his gaze. The music resumed. When they began to dance, the world blurred, chandeliers spinning above, murmurs fading to a hum. Ryder's hand guided hers with effortless authority, but his eyes, they betrayed something else. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "You mean defended you?" "I mean embarrassed him. Isn't that what he tried to do to you?" Ryder's mouth twitched again, but this time it wasn't amusement, it was warning. This world isn't kind to women who fight back. She met his gaze, pulse quickening. "Good thing I'm not here to be kind." For a moment the Duke forgot the crowd, the cameras, the scandal waiting in the corners. His stare softened, not in surrender, but recognition. "Careful, Estella," he said quietly. "You're starting to sound like you belong here." "Maybe I do," she whispered back. The orchestra swelled, the lights dimmed, and for a single heartbeat, the performance didn't feel like an act. The tension between them shimmered, dangerous, electric, impossible to ignore. That night Estella lay awake in the guest chamber of Hulston Hall, still wearing the remnants of the Duchess's gown. The city outside glittered, mocking her silence. Down the hall she could hear Ryder pacing, doors closing, voices low and tense. She didn't understand the politics or the power, but she understood this much. Whatever she'd signed up for was no longer pretend. It was real, and it was dangerous. The contract had made her a Duchess in name, the gala had made her a target, and Ryder Hulston, the man the world feared, was no longer just her employer. He was her risk, and maybe her undoing. The rain came 3 nights after the gala, hard, relentless, and cold, as though the heavens themselves wanted to wash away the scandal. Hulston Hall, ancient and sprawling, groaned under the storm's weight. Every corridor whispered, every candle flickered like it remembered secrets. Estella wandered its halls unable to sleep, her bare feet silent against marble. She had tried to close her eyes, but sleep refused her. The night at the gala replayed again and again. It was a beautiful prison, this estate, filled with gold frames, imported roses, and too many ghosts. She found him in the library. The doors were half open, the fire still burning. Ryder sat before it, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, one hand pressed to his temple as if he could silence his thoughts by force. Papers littered the desk, contracts, letters, old photographs. He didn't look up when she entered. "You're awake," she said softly. So are you. I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. The storm rumbled outside, thunder crawling along the walls. She hesitated, then crossed the room, her fingers trailing the edge of a bookshelf. You don't strike me as the type who loses sleep. I don't lose it, he said, eyes still on the fire. It just refuses to come. Estella's gaze softened. She saw the faint tremor in his fingers, the tension in his shoulders. Insomnia? He exhaled slowly. Nightmares. Something about the word, stripped of its armor, made her chest tighten. Because of her? She asked gently. Ryder looked at her then, grey eyes flickering in the firelight. Because of everything. He poured a drink, amber liquid catching the glow, and offered her the glass. She shook her head, sitting across from him instead. For a long while, neither spoke. The fire cracked, and the rain drummed against the glass. Finally, she said, The papers won't stop. They'll twist everything until it hurts. They already have, he murmured. They always do. Then fight them. Tell your side. My side doesn't sell. You think silence helps? I think silence survives, he said quietly. There it was again, that strange duality. The man who terrified London's elites, sitting before her like someone who had long since stopped expecting peace. She leaned forward, voice low. You don't have to be what they say you are. His eyes lifted to hers, sharp, piercing. And what do they say I am? The ruthless Duke. The man who destroys everything he builds. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. They're not wrong. You don't believe that. I don't have to. He turned back to the fire. Belief doesn't change truth. Estella stood, frustration sparking in her chest. You make it sound like you're already damned. Maybe I am. Maybe you're just afraid. That made him look at her. The air between them shifted. Afraid of what? Of feeling anything that could undo you. His gaze lingered on her face, longer than was proper. You think you can read me, Miss Vega? I think you've been asking to be read, she said softly. He rose then, slow and deliberate. The fire threw light over the strong lines of his face, the storm outlining his silhouette in pale flashes. He walked past her to the window, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand what happens when I let people close. Then explain it to me. He said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. Estella moved toward the window beside him. You stood by me at the gala. You didn't have to. You could have let me fall. Ryder's lips twitched, a flicker of amusement, gone too soon. You mistake survival instinct for kindness, she frowned, and you mistake isolation for strength. The words hung between them like lightning about to strike. He turned to her, eyes darker now. You think you know strength? You think you know what it takes to keep an empire standing while people tear at its foundation? She met his anger without flinching. No, but I know what it looks like to live behind walls so high even sunlight can't reach you. Silence. Then, almost a whisper, he said, Go to bed, Estella. But she didn't move. She stood there, watching him watch the storm, realizing that underneath the coldness was a man haunted by guilt and loneliness, so vast it echoed. When she finally turned to leave, he said her name again. Estella. She stopped. His eyes softened. Thank you. For what? For not looking at me like everyone else does. Her chest tightened, her voice nearly lost to the storm. How do they look at you? Like they're waiting for me to break. The next morning the power went out. The storm had worsened overnight, lightning flashing, wind rattling the shutters. The house seemed alive, its old bones groaning in protest. Estella found herself in one of the upper corridors carrying a candle. She'd meant to find breakfast, but the estate's size had other plans. A crash of thunder startled her. She stepped back, and her foot slipped on the wet marble. The world tilted, the candle tumbled from her hand. Before she could fall, strong arms caught her. Ryder. He had moved faster than she could comprehend, one arm around her waist, the other braced against the wall. The candle rolled across the floor, flame flickering wildly. Their faces were inches apart, his breath steady, hers trembling. For a long, suspended moment, they didn't move. "You should watch where you're going," he said quietly, though his voice sounded rougher than usual. "Maybe you should stop sneaking up on people." "I wasn't sneaking." "You were something," she breathed. The faintest ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Saving you from yourself, apparently." He still hadn't let go. The air between them crackled, charged by something neither wanted to name. Her hand brushed his chest, unintentional, but enough to feel the heartbeat beneath. "Ryder," she whispered, "you don't have to keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Saving me." His expression hardened. "Someone has to." "But who saves you?" For the first time she saw him falter. His grip loosened, and he took a step back, creating a distance that felt colder than the storm itself. "Go downstairs," he said. "The servants will light the hearth." She didn't move. "You didn't answer my question." "Because it doesn't matter." "It does." His gaze cut to hers, sharp, defensive, but beneath it was something breaking. "You think I keep people away because I don't care? Don't you?" His jaw tightened. Then, very quietly, he said, "No. I keep them away because I do." Estella blinked, her breath catching. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you'll get." Her voice softened. "You think you'll ruin them?" His silence was answer enough. "Ryder." He turned fully toward her now, eyes burning with something raw and unguarded. "Because everything I touch eventually breaks." The storm roared outside, lightning flashing across the hall. For a heartbeat, she saw him not as the Duke or the billionaire, but as a man convinced he was cursed by his own hands. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that not everything he touched shattered, that maybe this time he had met something, someone, stronger than he knew. But he was already walking away, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by thunder. Estella stood alone at the top of the staircase, heart aching for a man who didn't believe he deserved to be saved. And though she didn't realize it yet, that was the moment she stopped being his pretend Duchess and began becoming his calm. The wind whispered through the old halls, restless and cold. Outside, the rain had returned, painting streaks of silver down the tall windows. Inside, the air felt heavy with words neither of them had dared to speak since the night on the staircase. Estella stood before the drawing-room fire, staring into the flames as if they could offer answers. Ryder had been gone all afternoon, summoned to a board meeting in the city, and though she told herself she didn't care, she found herself listening for the sound of his car anyway. When it finally came, the low purr of the engine, the slam of the front door, her pulse betrayed her. She told herself she would stay where she was. She told herself none of this mattered. But by the time she heard his footsteps in the corridor, she was already turning toward the door. Ryder appeared in the threshold, rain clinging to his coat and hair, the storm still clinging to his shoulders like a curse. He said nothing for a moment, only looked at her, really looked, as if he hadn't expected to find her waiting. "You shouldn't stand so close to the fire," he said, voice rough. "You'll burn." "Maybe I want to," she replied, surprising them both. He exhaled slowly, setting his gloves aside. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not? Because of your rules?" "Because I might believe you." The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. When he finally crossed the room, the space seemed to contract around them. He poured himself a drink, his hands steady but his eyes shadowed. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, though this time it sounded less like a command and more like a plea. "I live here now," she said quietly. "It was your idea." His mouth tightened. That was a mistake. Her patience broke. "Everything is a mistake to you," breathing, caring, feeling anything at all. "Because everything I feel costs someone something," he snapped. "Because when I care, people die." The silence that followed was jagged and raw. He turned away, gripping the edge of the mantel as if to steady himself. The firelight carved deep lines into his face, revealing exhaustion beneath the power. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, his voice low, almost unrecognizable. "You see a man with money and control, but underneath, there's nothing worth saving." "Then tell me what made you believe that," she whispered. He didn't answer, his jaw flexed, his eyes fixed on the flames. Then, slowly, he said, "There was someone. Before all this." Estella's breath caught. "She was the reason I stopped believing in second chances." He reached into his pocket and drew out a locket, small, tarnished, its hinge nearly worn through. He opened it once, then closed it again as if the memory burned. "Charlotte," he said softly, "my fiancée." The name fell between them like glass shattering. "I've read about her," Estella admitted carefully. "The papers said—" "They lied," he cut in sharply. "They always lie." He ran a hand over his face, then spoke again, slower this time, as if each word weighed more than he could bear. "It was 5 years ago. We were driving back from a charity gala outside London. I'd just been warned that one of my deals was being sabotaged, competitors trying to send a message. I told her to take another route. She laughed." He paused. His throat worked, his voice cracking on the next word. "She always laughed." Estella didn't move. "It was raining hard. The brakes failed on the downhill. She lost control." His eyes drifted to the window, where rain still lashed against the glass. The car spun off the road. She pushed me out before it went over. She died saving me. The crash was meant for me." The confession bled out of him like poison, leaving nothing but the sound of the fire and the steady fall of rain. Estella pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God." He didn't look at her. "They said it was an accident. I knew better. The threats, the timing, it was no coincidence, but proving it wouldn't bring her back, and it wouldn't change the fact that I was the one who should have died that night." He laughed then, a hollow sound. "That's the night the Duke of Halston was born, the man who turned everything into numbers and rules and clauses, because it's easier to control people when you don't love them." Estella took a step closer. "That's why you made the no-love clause." He nodded once. "Love kills, Estella. Maybe not always in car crashes, but it kills in pieces, slowly." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't remember summoning. "You've been punishing yourself for surviving." His voice lowered, raw. "Wouldn't you?" She hesitated only a second before crossing the distance between them. "No," she said firmly, "because she wouldn't have wanted that." Ryder looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression cracked. The control, the arrogance, the endless restraint, it all slipped for a single trembling breath. "Don't do this," he whispered. "Do what?" "Make me remember what it feels like to hope." Her heart twisted. Maybe that's exactly what you need. He reached for her then, not out of desire but desperation, fingers brushing her wrist before stopping himself. "You don't know what you're offering," he said. "I'm offering you a chance to stop drowning," she whispered. "Estella." His voice was a warning and a confession all at once. She didn't back away. "You've spent years building walls out of guilt, but they've only trapped you inside. Let someone in." He stood frozen, torn between running and staying, between punishment and mercy. The rain outside grew heavier, thunder rumbling in the distance. Finally, he said in a voice that broke something inside her, "I can't promise you anything. I'm not asking for promises." For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Then he stepped forward and kissed her. It was soft, almost uncertain at first, the hesitant touch of a man who had forgotten what gentleness felt like. Then deeper, fuller, as if he were remembering. Her hands rose to his chest. His trembled when they met her waist. When they finally parted, the air between them felt electric, alive, too fragile to last. He rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured, voice trembling. "Why?" she asked, breathless. "Because it makes me want to believe again." Her voice softened. "Then believe." He drew in a sharp breath, stepping back as if the distance could save them both. "You don't understand, Estella. When I love, people die. When I care, things fall apart. I won't drag you into that." She shook her head. "You already have." He stared at her, the fire flickering between them. In his eyes she saw it, the storm, the longing, the unspoken plea. When he finally spoke, it wasn't cold or cruel. It was the voice of a man who had carried too much pain for too long. "I can't lose someone again." "Then don't," she whispered. "Don't lose me before you even have me." The words hung in the air as thunder rolled over the hills. Neither spoke again. He turned back to the fire, shoulders rigid, gaze unfocused. She stood in the doorway, heart torn between pity and something far more dangerous. Behind her, the flames hissed as another drop of rain slipped down the chimney, and the shadows swallowed his figure whole. It was the first time Estella realized she wasn't fighting a ruthless man, she was fighting a haunted one. And somewhere deep inside, she promised herself that if guilt had kept him in darkness, then she would be the one to lead him out. The morning it happened, Halston Hall woke to whispers. Servants moved in uneasy silence, carrying trays with trembling hands, eyes darting toward the newspapers stacked on silver platters. By noon, every corridor buzzed with the same dreadful secret. Someone had spoken to the press. Estella noticed the change before she understood it. The butler wouldn't meet her gaze. The maids who once greeted her with polite smiles now turned away. And when she stepped into the breakfast room, the newspaper lay folded on her plate like an accusation. Across the front page, bold and merciless, Duke's marriage exposed, contract bride bought for status. Her vision blurred. Beneath the headline were photographs of her, standing beside Ryder at the gala, walking into the carriage, smiling on the steps of the estate. Captions screamed lies dressed as truths. Former museum clerk secures title through secret deal. Sources confirm marriage was transactional. Gold digger Duchess of Halston Hall. The room tilted. Her teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered. No one moved to clean it. Footsteps sounded behind her. Ryder stood in the doorway, the same paper crushed in his hand. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between fury and restraint. "Who did this?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. "Someone inside the house," he finally said. "A servant, maybe. Someone who overheard more than they should have." She looked at him, the man who had offered her safety, now the one whose silence confirmed her ruin. "They called me a fraud," she said softly. "I'll handle it," he said too quickly. "I'll make it disappear." "How?" she asked. "By paying them? Threatening them? You can't erase this, Ryder. The world thinks I sold myself to you." He met her eyes. "Let them." "What?" "Let them believe it," he said, voice low. "If I deny it, they'll dig deeper. If I stay silent, it dies faster. This is the only way to protect you." "Protect me?" she repeated, disbelief cutting through the shock. "You think silence will protect me? You're letting them destroy me." "They'll destroy both of us if I don't," he said sharply. Then, quieter, almost pleading, "Estella, please, I can't fight the press and the board, not now." Her heart pounded. "So you'll let them humiliate me instead?" He stepped closer, rainwater dripping from his coat. "It's just words, it'll pass." Her voice broke. "It's my name." For a moment, neither spoke. Thunder rolled through the valley outside, shaking the window panes. Then she whispered, "You don't even sound angry, just afraid." He said nothing. And that silence, his silence, was the final wound. By afternoon, the entire estate knew. The staff avoided her, not out of contempt but fear. One of them, maybe the maid who'd seen the contract, maybe the footman who'd carried it to the lawyer, had leaked it for money. Now everyone prayed Ryder wouldn't find out who. Estella packed in silence. The room that had once felt like sanctuary now felt like a stage where she'd been performing a lie. She folded her dresses, her gloves, her books, all the little things that once made her feel like she belonged. When she reached for her wedding ring, she froze. The light caught it, glinting like gilt. Slowly she slid it off and placed it on the vanity. The door creaked open. Ryder stood there, pale, exhausted, his tie undone. "You're leaving," he said, though it sounded more like he was asking. "I can't stay here," she replied. "Every wall in this place is whispering my name." "I'll fix this," he said again, voice shaking slightly. "I always do." "You can't fix what you broke," she said quietly. His hand clenched at his side. "You think I wanted this?" "No," she said. "I think you were too afraid of the damage to your name to defend mine." He took a step forward, but she stepped back. "Estella." "Don't," she said, her voice trembling now. "You told me once that everything you touch breaks. I didn't believe you. I do now." The words hung between them like smoke. He looked away, jaw tight, the mask slipping just enough for her to see regret underneath. "Where will you go?" "Anywhere they don't know I was yours." Rain lashed against the windows. Somewhere deep in the house the clock struck noon, a sound that marked the end of something neither of them knew how to save. The car was waiting in the courtyard, engine humming softly in the mist. The servants watched from the doorway, faces pale, guilty. No one confessed, though all of them carried the same haunted look, the fear of what their whispers had unleashed. Estella didn't glance back. The wind lifted her hair as she walked toward the car, suitcase in hand, shoulders straight despite the tremor in her chest. Ryder stood at the top of the steps, unmoving. He didn't call out, didn't beg, didn't stop her. When the car door closed, she caught one last glimpse of him through the rain-streaked window, a silhouette carved from loneliness. He looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, and that somehow hurt most of all. The drive to London was long and grey. Her reflection in the glass looked like someone else, someone older, stripped of illusions. She should have cried, but the tears refused to come. There was nothing left to wash away. She found her old apartment dark and dusty. The landlord hesitated when he saw her, but pity outweighed rumour. She paid 3 months' rent in advance with the last of the stipend she'd received from the contract. Inside, the silence felt heavy but real. No marble floors, no servants, no lies, just her heartbeat and the distant hum of the city. She lit a candle, sat by the window, and whispered into the dark, "You can't break what's already rebuilding." Outside, thunder rolled again. Back at Holston Hall, the storm lingered. Ryder stood in his study, papers strewn across the desk. The board had called 3 times. The press waited outside the gates. But all he could think about was the sound of her voice when she'd said his name for the last time. He stared at the empty space where her books had been, the faint trace of her perfume still in the air. On the mantel, Charlotte's old locket glimmered faintly. He picked it up, then set it aside, whispering, "You'd hate what I've become." Then, quieter, "She would have saved me from myself." The rain fell harder, drowning the silence. And for the first time in years, the Duke of Halston didn't feel powerful at all. He felt human and utterly alone. The scandal burned through the city like wildfire, but fire always leaves ashes, and ashes settle. 3 months later, the world had moved on. The tabloids found new prey. Halston Hall grew quiet again, too quiet. The echo of servants' footsteps no longer carried gossip but fear. The Duke himself had become a shadow, a man locked inside his own fortress, surrounded by silence and ghosts. The threats, however, did not stop. Letters came in plain envelopes, unsigned. Words like murderer, liar, your day will come. They arrived daily now, slipped under doors, hidden in reports, whispered in meetings. Ryder didn't flinch anymore, but the servants did. One of them had leaked the contract months ago, and though he'd never found out who, everyone feared the next secret that might slip through. He had thought losing Estella would end the chaos. Instead, it ended the only part of his life that had made sense. In London, Estella had become everything the headlines said she wasn't. Her art restoration project, a collection of forgotten paintings rescued from ruined estates, had gone viral after an anonymous donor submitted her work to an exhibition. Museums now called her by name, the same name they once spat out in mockery. She didn't hide anymore. Under the soft glow of studio lights, with streaks of paint across her fingers and the scent of varnish in the air, Estella felt alive again. Every canvas she touched seemed to heal a piece of her own heart. When reporters asked about her past, she smiled, calm, poised. "Every woman deserves the chance to rebuild her story," she'd say. And somehow that line caught on. The rebuilder. That's what they called her in the papers now. Not the fake Duchess, not the gold digger, the woman who turned ruin into beauty. One evening she sat in her small London flat, surrounded by sketches, when the TV flickered on. A talk show host announced, "Up next, Estella Vega, the artist who taught London that redemption can be painted." Her name filled the room. She froze, a faint smile curving her lips. Half a city away in Halston Hall, Ryder sat in the dark with the same program glowing across the wall. He hadn't meant to see it. It had just appeared. A coincidence, or maybe punishment. And there she was. Her hair was shorter now, soft curls framing her face, her voice steadier. Her eyes, still the same light that had once filled his halls. "Pain teaches us things success never could," she was saying. "But it only destroys us if we stop believing we deserve peace." He didn't move, didn't breathe. His chest tightened until the world blurred. When the host asked if she regretted anything, she smiled faintly. "No. Some lessons have to hurt to matter." The studio laughed softly, touched. Ryder didn't. His throat burned. He reached for the remote. But instead, his hand covered his eyes. For the first time in years, the Duke of Halston Hall broke. Later that night, he found himself in the old chapel by the garden, the one Charlotte had loved, the one Estella had restored with fresh lilies last spring. He hadn't been here since the day Estella left. Dust clung to the pews, and ivy crept through the cracks. He stood before the altar, where a single candle still flickered from some forgotten vigil. His reflection in the stained glass looked older, worn, hollow. "Everything I touch breaks," he whispered. "I told her that, didn't I?" A soft voice broke the silence. "Yes, you did." He turned. An older man stood in the doorway, Dr. Everett, his late father's oldest friend, and his own mentor once upon a time. Ryder exhaled. "You shouldn't be here." Everett stepped forward, cane tapping the floor. "You sent for me." "I didn't." He stopped. Maybe he had. The letter he'd written weeks ago sat unopened on his desk, addressed but never sent. Everett studied him for a long moment. "You look like your father did before the fall. All power, no peace." "I lost her," Ryder said simply. Everett nodded. "You didn't lose her. You let her go because you thought it would keep her safe. You've mistaken control for care all your life." Ryder's jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "I understand too well," Everett interrupted softly. "You believe you carry a curse, that your guilt must keep everyone else unscathed. But that's not protection, Ryder. That's fear disguised as love." The words hit harder than he expected. Ryder sank onto the nearest pew. "Charlotte died because of me. That's not fear, that's truth." Everett's voice gentled. "You've punished yourself for years. How much longer do you think guilt will bring her back?" Ryder's head fell into his hands. The confession spilled before he could stop it. "She took my car that night," he said. "It should have been me. She saw the brake lights failing before I did and shoved me out. I heard the impact before I could even stand. The words echoed through the chapel like thunder. Everett placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've been living in that crash ever since. That's why you built the no-love clause, not to protect yourself, to keep anyone else from being close enough to die for you again." Ryder's voice cracked. "It was supposed to make things simple. It made you lonely." For a long moment, only the rain outside filled the silence. Then Everett said, "You don't honor the dead by dying with them. You honor them by living better than they ever could." Ryder lifted his gaze, eyes red. "She won't take me back." "Then you fight for her anyway," the old man said. "Not to possess her, to prove that you've changed." By morning, Ryder had made his decision. The threats didn't matter anymore. The press didn't matter. His name, his title, his pride, none of it compared to the hollow ache of a house without her laughter. He opened his study drawer, pulled out the original contract, the one that had started everything. The ink was faded, the signature still sharp. Clause 17. No emotional entanglement. No romantic involvement. He burned it. When the flames died, he looked out over the wet gardens, the same ones she'd once walked barefoot through, smiling despite the mud. "Estella," he whispered to the morning light, "you rebuilt the world I destroyed. Now let me try to rebuild you." He turned to his driver. "Prepare the car. We're going to London." In her studio, Estella stood before her newest canvas, a half-finished portrait of an open door surrounded by wild ivy. She didn't know why she painted it, only that it felt like release. Outside, thunder rolled, a familiar rhythm that made her heart pause. She smiled faintly, unaware that miles away, the man she once called impossible was already on his way, ready to risk everything not to claim her, but to earn the right to stand beside her again. The air shimmered with crystal light and murmured wealth, the kind that could make or break reputations in a single breath. London's annual Art Philanthropy Gala had drawn its finest. Politicians, collectors, socialites, and the vultures of the press, their lenses hungry for another scandal. Estella stood on stage, poised beneath the chandelier, her gown the color of moonlight, simple, elegant, defiant. The crowd that had once whispered her ruin now listened in silence. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what this night meant. She was no longer the woman who arrived at Holston Hall with trembling hands and borrowed grace. She had rebuilt herself, stroke by stroke, gallery by gallery. This was her victory. Her voice was calm as she began. "Art is not about perfection," she said. "It's about restoration, about seeing value in what others call broken." Applause followed, warm but cautious. And then from the back of the grand hall a ripple of motion, a murmur that spread like fire. Estella looked up. Ryder Holston was walking down the aisle. The crowd parted instinctively. He was dressed in black, as always, but tonight there was no armor in it. Just a man stripped of pride walking into the light he'd once hidden from. His eyes found hers, and for a heartbeat the noise fell away. She whispered, "No, not here." But he didn't stop. When he reached the edge of the stage, he looked up at her. Not as the Duke of Holston, not as her employer, not as the man who'd once broken her heart, but as someone finally ready to earn it. The murmurs swelled. Cameras flashed. Ryder took a slow breath, then spoke, his voice carrying through the hall with quiet conviction. "I was the one who lied." The silence deepened. He turned to the crowd. "You all remember the headlines, with the contract, the scandal, the so-called Duchess for hire. Every word printed about her was built on my cowardice." Gasps erupted. Somewhere, a camera clicked furiously. Estella's breath caught. Ryder continued, voice steady. "I told the world our marriage was an arrangement, and everyone believed she wanted my name, my power. But the truth is, I needed her far more than she ever needed me." He looked up at her again, eyes glass bright. "I once told myself that everything I touched broke. I was wrong. You didn't break. You made me remember what it meant to feel alive." The room was a storm. Whispers, shock, awe. Estella felt her pulse thrumming in her throat. Ryder, she began, but he wasn't finished. I built a life out of fear, he said, voice cracking slightly. I thought keeping love out would keep pain away. I was wrong. You were the only truth I ever had, Estella. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that again. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old contract, the paper that had bound them once like chains. He tore it in half. The sound, soft, final, echoed louder than any applause. But before the silence could settle, a voice sliced through it. Touching, sneered a man from the back of the hall. A perfect confession. Shame it won't undo what's coming. All heads turned. Lord Winslow, Ryder's former rival, the one whose sneer had once humiliated Estella at the first gala, stepped forward, flanked by two reporters. He held a folder in his hand, thick with documents. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, before we applaud this redemption story, perhaps you should know the truth. The Duke's guilt isn't about love. It's about corruption. These are financial records, proof that Halston Enterprises used charity funds to cover his private debts. The crowd gasped again. Cameras surged forward. Estella felt the air rush out of her lungs. Ryder's face went pale. Winslow smiled coldly. Quite the scandal, isn't it? Perhaps your Duchess will restore that reputation too. He extended the folder toward the nearest reporter, but Estella stepped forward before he could. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she descended from the stage. Enough, she said. Her voice was clear, commanding. It silenced the room faster than any headline could. She turned to Winslow. You always do enjoy tearing others down, but I've spent months learning what truth looks like. And this isn't it. He sneered. How would you know? You're just the woman he paid to smile. Estella didn't flinch. I know because I was there. I saw the accounts. I saw what he built after his father's fall, not to hide, but to help rebuild the lives that man destroyed. She faced the crowd. Every pound that left Halston Enterprises went to the foundation in my name, the same one that sponsors artists, orphans and widows of the very workers your company dismissed, Lord Winslow. Murmurs surged again, this time against him. Ryder blinked, stunned. You knew. She turned to him, soft but certain. Of course I did. You thought you could hide your goodness the way you hid your grief. But you can't bury light, Ryder. It finds a way out. Winslow's face blanched. You have no proof. Oh, but I do, she said calmly. You should have been more careful when you bribed one of his clerks. They gave me this instead. It turns out that during the period of their fake marriage, Estella, concerned, dedicated herself to help Ryder fight these scandals. From her clutch, she pulled a folded letter, signed by Winslow's assistant, dated weeks before the first leak. The reporters surged forward. Winslow tried to speak, but the cameras caught every angle of his retreat, the downfall of a man undone by his own greed. The hall erupted in flashes and whispers, this time not of scandal, but of vindication. Estella turned back toward Ryder. For the first time in months he smiled, small, disbelieving, full of wonder. You still save me, he murmured. She shook her head, voice trembling. No. You finally saved yourself. The orchestra began to play softly again, the tension dissolving into something fragile, beautiful. Ryder stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. I never deserved you, he said quietly. You never had to, she whispered back. And then, before the crowd that once condemned them both, he dropped to one knee. Gasps filled the hall. Not for the title, he said. Not for the redemption. Just for the chance to love you the way I should have from the start. Her vision blurred with tears. Around them the world fell away. Only his voice, his eyes, his trembling hand reaching for hers. Estella Merrin, he said softly. Will you give me another year? Not as a duchess, not by contract, but by choice. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Then she laughed, a sound light and raw and full of life. Yes, she whispered, but this time, no signatures. He smiled, stood, and pulled her into him. The applause that followed shook the chandeliers. Outside, the night exploded with flashbulbs as they emerged hand in hand. The same press that once devoured them now chased their light. "Duke and Duchess reunited," someone shouted. Estella leaned close, whispering against his shoulder. "You realize you just handed them their next headline?" Ryder smiled faintly. "Let them write what they want. For once the story's true." He kissed her then, not as apology, not as confession, but as promise. When they finally stepped into the waiting car, the city lights blurred into gold. Ryder's hand stayed clasped in hers the entire way. Behind them, the old world they'd both been trapped in burned to dust. Ahead of them, a new one waited, built not from fear but from love that had survived every storm. The spring sunlight spilled gently across the valley, warm and golden, the kind of light that made even old stone seem to breathe again. Halston Hall stood reborn. Gone were the cold portraits, the shuttered rooms, the silence that once ruled its corridors. In their place were laughter, art and music. What had once been a fortress was now a sanctuary. It had taken months, endless hours of planning and rebuilding, but the Duke and his Duchess, though the titles felt smaller than their story, had transformed the estate into something new, the Halston Art Foundation, an open space for underprivileged youth to learn, create, and belong. Children's laughter echoed through the gardens. Canvases leaned against walls once hung with stern ancestors. The ballroom that had once hosted hollow galas now brimmed with colour, life, and second chances. And Estella, radiant, confident, unafraid, stood in the centre of it all, her hands lightly dusted with paint as she guided a group of children through their first watercolour lesson. "Use your mistakes," she told them, smiling as one boy frowned over a crooked horizon. "Art isn't about getting it right, it's about feeling it deeply." From the doorway, Ryder watched her with quiet awe. The morning light caught the silver at his temples, but the weight he'd carried for years, the guilt, the isolation, the endless penance, had lifted. His face, for the first time in years, was at peace. He had once believed he was cursed to break everything he touched. But the woman before him had proved otherwise. Later that evening, the halls glowed with candlelight. The first charity gala of the new foundation was underway, not for prestige or power, but for purpose. The guests were different now, artists, teachers, dreamers. Not a whisper of gossip in the air, only admiration for what the fallen Duke and the once maligned curator had built together. As Estella descended the grand staircase, every conversation in the room stilled. She wore ivory satin, simple but breathtaking, her hair swept back with a single white rose. Around her neck hung a delicate silver chain, and on her hand, his grandmother's ring, glinting softly under the chandeliers. Ryder stood at the base of the stairs, dressed in black again, but this time the darkness wasn't armor, it was elegance. He looked up, smiled, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. Every heartbreak, every mistake, every tear leading to this. "You're late," he teased, offering his hand. "I had to make sure the children didn't paint the door again," she replied, laughing. He drew her close, his thumb brushing against the ring. "It suits you." "It's heavy," she whispered, eyes shining, like it remembers everything this house has seen. "Then let it remember something good for once," he said softly. The orchestra began to play, a soft waltz that carried through the golden air. Ryder led her into the dance floor, and the crowd instinctively parted. All eyes followed as the Duke and Duchess of Halston began to move, slow, graceful, real. There were no cameras, no headlines, no contracts, only two people who had chosen, again and again, to stay. As they danced beneath the glittering chandeliers, Estella rested her head against his chest. The steady beat of his heart felt like home. "You remember the night of our first gala?" she murmured. He huffed a quiet laugh. "When I nearly ruined your debut, hard to forget." "You didn't ruin it," she said. "You just made it unforgettable." He looked down at her, eyes soft. "And tonight?" She smiled. "Tonight we make history." He leaned closer. "No more pretending." Her voice was a whisper against his jaw. "No more pretending." His breath caught, and he answered low and sure. "No more conditions." Their foreheads touched as they swayed, lost in the kind of silence that spoke louder than applause. Hours later, after the guests had gone and the music faded, they wandered out into the gardens. The moon hung low, painting the lawns silver. Lanterns glowed among the roses, the same gardens where Estella had once walked alone, thinking herself an imposter in his world. Now it was their world, rebuilt, redefined, redeemed. Ryder took her hand and guided her to the marble fountain at the center. Its waters shimmered with reflected starlight. "Do you ever think about before?" he asked quietly. "All the time," she admitted. "But only to remind myself how far we've come." He nodded. "I used to believe love was dangerous, that it demanded more than I had to give. But you taught me it isn't about control, it's about surrender." She smiled. "And trust." He looked at her, really looked, as if memorizing every freckle, every flicker of light in her eyes. "You rebuilt my life, Estella. Not as the Duchess, not as the curator, but as yourself. I owe you everything." She shook her head gently. "You don't owe me anything. You gave me a story no one else could, one that started in fear and ended in love." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then we're even." She laughed softly. "Almost. What's missing?" Her eyes danced. "The ending." He smiled. "Then let's write it." He drew her close again, their reflection shimmering on the fountain's surface. The night breeze carried the faint melody of the waltz, still echoing from the hall. "I love you," he said simply. No hesitation, no restraint. Her heart swelled. "Say it again." He did, quietly, reverently, like a prayer. She rose on her toes, pressing her lips to his. The world stilled. No crowd, no crown, no past. Just two souls who had finally found their peace. When they pulled apart, her tears caught the moonlight. "This place feels alive again," she whispered. He nodded. "Because you brought its heart back." "And you?" she asked. "I just followed the sound." They stood in silence for a moment, the fountain murmuring between them, the future unfolding like a promise. The next morning, the papers told their story again, but this time with different words. From scandal to legacy, the Duke and the curator who rebuilt hope. Photographs of the children painting in the restored halls filled the front page. The headline no longer hurt, it healed. Estella looked up from the paper as Ryder walked in, still in his robe, hair tousled from sleep. He poured her coffee, kissed the top of her head, and grinned. "No headlines about me brooding this time," he said. "Give them a few days," she teased. He leaned down, voice low against her ear. "Let them write whatever they want. For once, the truth's better than the fiction." She smiled into her cup. "Our story was always art, wasn't it?" He nodded, wrapping his arms around her. "Messy, painful, but worth every brushstroke." They stayed like that for a long time, the house alive around them, the ghosts finally quiet. Outside, the sunlight spilled across the valley again, brighter than ever. Do you believe love can truly heal even the most guarded hearts? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to know what you think.